Usually, if people know any of our Unitarian Universalist principles, they know number 1 and number 7. Maybe it's because they're the first and the last. Maybe it's because they're sort of an unspoken core of our theology. The interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, and the inherent worth and dignity of every person. For me, the next easiest to remember is what I want to talk about today. It's our 5th principle. We covenant to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. Our 7 principles, and particularly this one, sometimes slip beneath the surface of our mind. We believe them so deeply, we've internalized them so much that we kind of take them for granted. If you take anything home from you today, I hope that it will be an awareness that for us, democracy is more than a political habit. The ideal of democracy is a reflection of our core values. 1 vote per person, with each vote holding equal weight. Democracy suggests that every person within a community matters equally. Of course, that ideal of equality isn't ever expressed perfectly. For the most part in the United States, we've moved more and more toward fuller recognition of equality and access. Even while the extension of our democracy remains imperfect and human equality is directly challenged by some, the equality of individuals is a foundation of democracy. And those who deny the full equality of our human family do great damage to that ideal of democracy. Racism, homophobia, patriarchy, and any other social disease that understands one group of people as inherently worth more or less than another is a direct challenge to democracy and to our country. Democracy is inseparable from the ideal of equality. The other particular value that grounds democracy is a belief in each person's capacity for reason and moral discernment. This was, and in some ways still is, a controversial idea. Each and every person has access to the truth. In our religious lives, this is sometimes called the priesthood of all believers. It's the idea that every participant in a religious community has access to the sacred, and they share a responsibility to share what they have found with the rest of their community. In political terms, we know that each and every person has the gift of reason and moral discernment. It's their right and responsibility to exercise that gift and to participate in decision-making for the interest of the whole community. Democracy suggests 2 things that are very important to us as Unitarian Universalists: the inherent equality of people and our ability to think through things logically. No group of people, whether selected by God or selected by genealogy or selected by tradition or won by brute force, no group of people has superior access to truth. Democracy is more than an expedient way for a big group of people to make a decision. It's a reflection of some of our very particular beliefs as Unitarian Universalists. Sometimes in religious communities, and I know this has come up here, sometimes a debate emerges about the need to do more engagement on social justice issues or to be more focused on spiritual depth. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we pose those 2 activities as exclusive of each other. marching down the sidewalk, waving our signs, and chanting through bullhorns can be as spiritually grounded as meditation. And personal reading or prayer can be as politically important as writing letters to our elected representatives. Some balance between those two is definitely a good thing. But I think that balance is best found when we understand that the two activities are working together, not against each other. We've done a lot of work in supporting democracy historically and today. I know a lot of you are engaged directly in party politics, and some of you have canvassed door to door. In this current climate that Michelle was referring to, in the midst of fear and division, we find our own small ways to make a difference. And that work is hard. Mostly it's emotionally draining. In our largely comfortable lives, the emotional toll and time and money spent supporting democracy can feel like a lot. In that sacrifice and fear of confrontation, I think it serves us well to remember the sacrifices that others have made to defend democracy, particularly here. For over 300 years around the world, brave people have sacrificed, fought and died, and I don't mean figuratively, I mean quite literally. Here in the United States, people have fought and sacrificed mightily for our system of government and access to the vote. So I want to talk a little bit about the scale of those sacrifices, not to glorify a particular strategy, but to give some context to our efforts on Facebook. The American War of Independence took 13 bloody years. I was surprised to learn that only 4,435 died in battle, but around 10,000 died from disease related to the war. What started as a scrappy group of untrained farmers grew into a disciplined army by the end. And the pressure and the passion around this war was so intense that boys as young as 10 years old enlisted to serve alongside their fathers. The American Civil War was perhaps our greatest moment of sacrifice for democracy. It cost 625,000 lives, nearly as many American soldiers as died in all the other wars combined. It ended April 9th, 1865. Slavery was abolished, and 4 million black slaves were freed. 4 million people were recognized as human beings rather than as property of a white man. So when we feel uncomfortable or frightened or tired of our efforts to defend democracy, let us remember 625,000 lives were lost in battle to free 4 million enslaved people here, just 160 years ago. In talking about the sacrifices for democracy, we have to also mention World War II. I'm not an expert in any of this, but I want to share with you just how Wikipedia describes the extent of that war. The vast majority of the world's countries formed 2 opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. A state of total war emerged, directly involving more than 100 million people from more than 30 countries. The major participants threw their entire economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities behind the war effort. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, marked by 70 to 85 million fatalities. Only a mad person would lift up these moments as cause to celebrate. They have scarred our psyche and our country, and they've seeded an insatiable desire for military spending. A lot of those sacrifices were unwilling, and they were financially driven. Still, at the center of all of that conflict was a debate about how human communities should organize themselves, and if they should have the right to self-determination. To those horror stories, I would add the sacrifices of brave women and men who fought nonviolently for American democracy. Those who fought for the right to vote, for access to education and equitable employment, for untold numbers of African Americans who were lynched, and for women. When they pursued their equality, they were institutionalized and labeled as clinically hysterical. And still they persist today to achieve an equal seat at the table of political representation. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without its awful roar and waters. Frederick Douglass taught us and teaches us still. Around the world and here in the United States, democracy faces some severe challenges. As in centuries past, we're called to make some sacrifices. Fortunately, in this moment in this country, the struggle is not a violent one. More and more, I believe, it's a deeply personal and relational struggle. It calls on a different kind of courage, not for putting our bodies in harm's way, but for putting our hearts on the line. The Reverend Ellie Kemmler tells the story of how democracy plays out in her small New England town where she serves a UU congregation there. It's quaint, but I think it describes the courage that we're called to. The town where she lives is that kind of small town where people actually know each other and help one another. She says that one fall, the local paper ran 2 stories that sort of typified this community. One was a letter of the local animal control officer thanking residents who helped round up 5 ponies and a goat and found their way home. Apparently the goat figured out how to escape. The neighbors recognized this small herd and helped them find their own way home. The other story was a gentle warning about a missing Halloween decoration, a 4-foot-tall styrofoam gravestone. They clearly stated that if it was returned to its owners, no questions would be asked. One of the pieces of the magic of this town is the way it manages itself. In town meetings, they gather in a school auditorium, and when issues arise, they vote by show of hands. There are no secret ballots, just neighbors gathered in a room expressing their views honestly and openly. Of course, no town is perfect. She says that national political atmosphere shaped one of their recent simple projects. Some of the town leadership proposed a decorative stone entrance to construct on the way into town. And carved on those stones would be the words, "All are welcome here." Not too long after, discussions in the town started to include words like illegals and criminal elements. And the Unitarian Church, not surprisingly, was put in the spotlight, accused of promoting a pro-gay, pro-immigrant agenda. After taking a collective deep breath, they proudly confirmed their commitment to solidarity with marginalized people. She says that finally the day came for the vote on this sign, this all are welcome entrance to the community. and she knew that she had to keep her eyes open during the vote to see who voted no on this symbol of compassion. The measure to fund the welcome gate passed by a healthy margin, but still it was a painful, intense time. She writes, "The welcome stones have been put into place now. The best hopes of those of us who wanted them have not come to pass, and neither have the worst fears of those who did not. Time will inevitably soften their edges. I pray we will become more able to live into the welcome they proclaim. In the meantime, we're still here, our lives interwoven in this place we call home." I wanted to share this story with you because it offers a very different perspective on democracy. While both CNN and Fox News, both Democrats and Republicans assail each other as enemies of democracy and destroyers of the Constitution, the sacrifices necessary for our democracy might be different this go-round. We're not necessarily called to take up arms or send our sons and daughters to the battlefield. We're called to a different kind of bravery. We're called to show up to the discussion, to keep our eyes open when our neighbors vote against us. We're called to keep our eyes and our hearts and our minds open when our neighbors voice an opinion that's disappointing or even hurtful. And we're called to take a collective, deep breath and clearly and calmly proclaim that, yes, we do mean all are welcome here. Yes, we do mean that all people have worth and dignity. We're all gifted with a mind for reason and a heart for moral discernment, and we intend for each and every person to use those gifts to determine the course of this community. The ideal of democracy is never, ever fully done. But we can, if we choose to, lift our voices and live democracy into being, wherever the opportunity arises. Amen.